Joining me now is Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action President, the author of Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America, Kevin Roberts, back with us. Kevin, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So the inauguration is going to be a big event. Lots of foreign leaders want to be there. And right after he is sworn in, he'll go right to the Oval Office and start with his pen on 100 executive orders. What do you expect those to be?
Well, I expect the first minutes after President Trump being sworn in to be the beginning of the golden era of America, as he's been saying, and as we've been saying the last few years at Heritage. And I think in those executive orders, Maria, to be specific, you're going to see great substantive rollback of the American administrative state, which stands in the way of Americans' prosperity and self-governance and freedom. That's just the beginning, though, because you've had some great guests from Congress today and yesterday on your other show who are talking about the legislative vehicles that will accompany those great executive orders. Every American ought to be very excited about this, but also stand at the ready to call their member of the House and the U.S. Senate and encourage them to do what they need to do in order to accentuate the Trump-Vance agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I'm told that one of his executive orders on Monday is going to be a freeze of all pending regulation, freezing all of Biden and Democrats' destructive policies. And man, have they been destructive. Look what we're looking at in Los Angeles today and these wildfires, Kevin. I spoke with Devin Nunes yesterday, who, of course, is a former California congressman and has been studying the failed policies of California. He went right to it, the mistakes that Gavin Newsom has made that led us here. Listen to this.
But it's pretty simple. It's water. It's grazing, it's logging. Those industries have all been hampered. If you look at agriculture, we're down in land that's being farmed because of lack of water. This means when farms don't get water, guess what? The LA Basin also doesn't get water. So as you're building out and adding people and adding homes in the Los Angeles Basin, if you don't have an adequate, abundant water supply and you're rationing water, the people that are building those homes, the city planners, they're not putting in green areas. They're not building fire breaks. If you run the farmers and ranchers out of the state of California, guess what? You don't have the animals to sit there and graze. So a combination of the proper land management would solve all of this problem. Now, what's going to happen? They're going to, just like they've done for the last 20 years, California's going to run to the federal government, and they're going to ask for money. And I think this time, hopefully, I think President Trump and the Republicans in Congress will say, look, we're just not going to keep doing the same thing again. So California's going to need a lot of money.
So, Kevin, this is what Warren Davidson from Ohio told us last week. They don't think the president is going to allocate any more money to California without a promise that policies change. You heard with Devin Nunes. This is all about the climate change agenda. Because of the climate change agenda, Nunes said they didn't allow the timber industry to log and cut down trees. They didn't allow the farmers in there to get the grazing, and they didn't store water. And now we've got people losing everything. Buildings burnt to the ground.
A year ago, Maria, as you remember, you and I sat down and talked at Davos, of all places, where you and I were both trying to inject some truth into that climate change agenda. And one of the predictions that I made, and I'm very sorry to be right about this tragedy, is that eventually voters in places like California and across Europe would come to understand that this so-called climate change agenda would actually cost not just their livelihoods, but their lives. What's really important for us to understand as we usher in this wonderful new administration, which will probably have the greatest cabinet in history, is that if we have cabinet secretaries like an interior secretary like Doug Burgum, an ag secretary like my great friend Brooke Rollins, these kinds of things would not happen because the federal government would actually be controlling the forest, using controlled burns, as I talk about in my book, by the way. But most importantly, the key thing is that individual voters in California have to understand they have to draw a line in the sand and say enough is enough.
Yeah, it's a great point. We'll be watching closely how this plays out. I remember our conversation. You were right. Let's talk about the confirmation hearings and what gets done for President Trump's cabinet picks. They begin tomorrow. Scheduled for tomorrow, Veterans Affairs Secretary pick Doug Collins, Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. His hearing will begin tomorrow. Interior Secretary nominee Doug Burgum. I spoke with Kansas Senator Roger Marshall about this yesterday. Here's what he's expecting. You met with President Trump this week, along with your colleagues. Did you have a chance to speak with your colleagues? Do you believe you have the votes in the Senate to actually confirm all of his nominees?
I hate to count my chickens before they hatch, but yes, I do. I think that they need to go through the hearing process. They're going to get beat up by the legacy media and the left as well, but I think the votes are there. And, as I've interviewed these people one-on-one, they've been great communicators. They're great leaders. They're very accomplished. Yes, some of them are outside the box, but I do think we have the votes.
What do you think, Kevin? And by the way, outside the box is exactly what President Trump wanted. He wants to drain the swamp. He wants outsiders. Do you think somebody like a Pete Hegseth, for example, for defense secretary, does he get confirmed?
He does get confirmed. I think he's going to be the most awesome defense secretary in our history. And the reason why is because what I hear from hundreds of rank and file servicemen and women, Maria, is that they are fed up with business as usual in Washington. We need to develop lethal efficiency in the Pentagon. And we simply haven't done that in spite of the heroism and sacrifice of our millions of American servicemen and women. I think ultimately Pete's ability to talk about his expertise, his plans for the department, and to Senator Marshall's excellent point, his communication ability, his ability to explain to the American people what's at stake if we don't initiate these reforms is unparalleled. By the way, I think that communication ability is true for every single cabinet selection. I applaud President Trump for doing that. I think the American people 6 months, 12 months down the road will be very grateful, not just for President Trump and Vice President Vance themselves, but for the leadership that will be offered by every one of these cabinet secretaries, every one of whom, by the way, should be confirmed quickly for the sake of national security and also domestic needs, as is evidenced by the California wildfires.
Well, one major star is John Ratcliffe, and he's going to push for more accountability from Beijing, which I think most people agree with. So we'll be watching that one as well. On Pete Hegseth, Liz Peek, jump in here because we'll be watching what Joni Ernst does on this one. Senator Ernst has been critical of Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to derail one of these nominations, Maria. And indeed, Joni Ernst is going to be incredibly pivotal here. I think the question is, are the Democrats going to throw roadblocks up in the nominating process? Clearly, the media would like to see that happen. One question I have, Kevin, Kash Patel is not up for his hearings until February. Why is there such a delay in bringing on what many Americans think is an incredibly pivotal post right now?
Liz, great question. I'll be blunt. Because the deep state is going to deep state, and the agency that needs the most urgent reform, evidenced by the persecution of Donald Trump, is the FBI, and Kash Patel is the guy who will do that. This is why, by the way, Heritage and Heritage Action are spending over $1 million running ads in key states, supporting, by the way, Kash Patel. We dropped our ad last week. We've done the same for Pete Hegseth. But ultimately, it's incumbent upon Senator Thune, who has done an excellent job up to this point managing this process, to expedite the confirmation hearings of Kash Patel, because the FBI is in dire need, not just of reform, but of overhaul.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've lived it as well, Kevin, on the FBI. What about Tulsi Gabbard? What are your thoughts?
I think Tulsi, of all of the appointees, and unfairly so, probably has the most difficult path. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's impossible, and I want to be clear. We support her confirmation, and we'll be battling for her. But the deep state is very concerned about her skepticism, very well-founded skepticism about the national intelligence apparatus. I do think, however, what's going to happen is there will be a momentum that happens in the next few days.
All right, Kevin. Great to talk with you. Thanks so much. We will see you soon. Kevin Roberts. Quick break and then